Everyone is supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. But what happens when the system gets it completely wrong? Imagine being blamed for a crime you didn't commit, watching as the evidence turns against you and facing a punishment you can never escape. For these 7 people, the truth came out too late. This is Carlos de Luna, who faced the ultimate penalty in Texas on December 7th, 1989. His case is one of the most haunting examples of how one mistake can cost a person everything. He was convicted of taking the life of Wanda Lopez, a gas station cashier in Corpus Christi, Texas, in February 1983. But from the start, the case against him was full of doubts. It was built on unreliable eyewitness testimony, contradictions, and ignored evidence that pointed to someone else. So how did it all happen? On the evening of February 4th, 1983, Wanda Lopez was working alone at a gas station when she was confronted and tragically lost her life. Moments before, she had called 911. She was terrified of a man with a weapon who was present outside. She begged for help, but by the time officers arrived, it was too late. Not long after the tragic event, police found Carlos de Luna hiding under a truck near the crime scene. They thought they had their man. But did they? They arrested him mainly because he looked like the suspect described by witnesses and was nearby. De Luna was just 20 years old, with a minor criminal record. He insisted from the start that he was innocent. He claimed he ran away after witnessing the actual person responsible, a man named Carlos Hernandez, carry out the crime. The key evidence? A single witness who caught only a quick glimpse of the suspect in a poorly lit area during a chaotic moment. Could you confidently identify someone in those conditions? The jury believed he could. Meanwhile, the defense argued that another man, Carlos Hernandez, was the real criminal. Hernandez had a long history of crimes, yet prosecutors brushed off the claim as a made-up story. And de Luna's defense? It fell short in many ways. His court-appointed attorney didn't dig into Hernandez's background or bring forward evidence that could have backed up de Luna's story. On top of that, there was no physical proof, no bloodstains, no weapon which could tie him to the crime. Even with these major gaps, the jury found him guilty, and he was given the capital punishment. Years after de Luna's sentence, new investigations started raising serious doubts about his guilt. In 2012, an investigation by the Columbia Human Rights Law Review uncovered strong evidence pointing to another man, Carlos Hernandez, as the real criminal. Hernandez was well known in Corpus Christi for his troubled past, and several people remembered him openly admitting that he was the one responsible for what happened to Lopez. Surprisingly, Hernandez looked a lot like de Luna, which probably played a big role in the misidentification. The investigation also revealed that law enforcement knew about Hernandez and his history of crimes, but never seriously considered him a suspect. This mistake, along with a weak defense and unreliable eyewitness testimony, led to a tragic miscarriage of justice. On December 23, 1991, just 2 days before Christmas, thick black smoke curled around the ceilings, flames licking at the walls. Cameron Willingham managed to escape the burning house, his hair singed, his body covered in soot, and his shoulders badly burned. But his worst nightmare had already come true. His 2-year-old daughter, Amber, and 1-year-old twins, Carmen and Cameron, didn't make it out. His wife, Stacy, had been out shopping for Christmas presents, but she was unaware that her precious life as she knew it was about to change forever. Investigators searched through the ashes, looking closely at the burn marks on the floor. The shapes were too clear, too perfect. It didn't seem normal. Near the front door, they found traces of something that could have helped the fire spread. Was this really just an accident, or something more? Neighbors Brandis and Diane Barbie said they begged Willingham to go back inside and save his daughters, but according to them, he never even tried. Officers also found it suspicious that just days after the fire, Willingham returned to the house with friends and family to retrieve personal belongings. They felt it was unusual behavior. But was this suspicious behavior, or just someone trying to hold on to what little he had left? As Willingham sat in shock, still grieving his daughters, officers knocked on his door. This time, they weren't offering condolences. They were there to arrest him. Investigators couldn't agree on a clear reason behind the fire, but they suggested several possibilities. One theory was that he had started it with the intention of harming his children. The prosecutors argued that setting the house on fire was Willingham's third attempt to get rid of his children, claiming he had even tried to have them aborted during the pregnancy. However, there were no police reports or medical records to back up these claims. The trial took a bizarre turn. Prosecutors weren't just pointing to the fire, they were pointing to his body, his skull and serpent tattoo, a sign of a violent mind, his Iron Maiden and Led Zeppelin posters, proof of cult-like obsession. It didn't matter that none of this had anything to do with the fire. They had already decided Cameron Willingham was a monster. If there was no proof, why did they go so far to make people believe it? During his trial on January 8, 1992, Willingham was given the opportunity to avoid the capital punishment by accepting a life sentence in exchange for a guilty plea. He refused and decided to stand by his innocence. Prosecutors claimed he had set the fire by pouring lighter fluid as he left the house, which, they argued, explained why he only had minor burns. Later, investigators explained that while his burns and injuries seemed minor, they were actually consistent with someone who had been inside the house before it was completely consumed by flames. But by then, it was too late. His fate had already been decided. He fought for multiple appeals, but none were successful. On February 17, 2004, Willingham faced the ultimate penalty. After he passed away, people started speaking out, saying they believed State Deputy Fire Marshal Manuel Vasquez had used flawed science to examine the evidence and declare the fire was arson. Multiple professional fire experts tested and re-examined the evidence, and all of them agreed there was no sign of arson. Fire investigator Gerald Hurst went through every scenario and experiment step by step. He ultimately determined that there was no arson at all. He sent his findings to Governor Rick Perry's office, hoping it would help Willingham get clemency. But Perry dismissed it, saying Willingham was a monster. More investigations followed, and every one of them pointed to the same conclusion. Cameron Willingham had been innocent all along. He had spent his final moments insisting on the truth. But in the end, the truth had come too late. This is Robert Cantu, who had a rough childhood. When he was 14, his parents separated, and he moved in with his father in a crime-ridden neighborhood on the south side of San Antonio, Texas. Growing up in South San Antonio wasn't easy. Reuben Cantu, known to friends as Reuben, watched his world fall apart when his parents split. At just 14, he moved into a small trailer with his father in a neighborhood where crime was just another part of life. By 15, he had joined the Gray Eagles, a local gang. At first, it was just a way to survive. But before long, he wasn't just part of the group. He was leading their car theft operation, sending stolen vehicles across the border for fast cash. Even though Cantu was unlawfully taking items, he managed to stay out of trouble until November 1984. According to trial records, on the night of November 8th, around 11:30 p.m., 17-year-old Reuben and his 15-year-old friend David Garza entered a vacant home that was still under construction. Inside, two construction workers, 25-year-old Pedro Gomez and 19-year-old Juan Moreno, were asleep on mattresses on the floor, reportedly keeping watch for burglars. The workers were still in their work clothes, with cash from the day's earnings in their pockets. Rubin and Garza, armed with a rifle, confronted them, demanding their money and wristwatches. As tensions rose, Gomez attempted to reach for a pistol hidden nearby. In response, gunfires erupted, turning the robbery into a fatal encounter. Gomez was hit multiple times and did not survive. The attackers then turned to Moreno, shooting him multiple times before fleeing the scene. Against all odds, Moreno survived, even after losing a lung, a kidney, and part of his stomach. There were no leads in the tragic incident, but before long, rumors started spreading through the halls of South San Antonio High School, where Cantu had been a student. Before he knew it, people were linking him to the crime. During the investigation, Juan Moreno couldn't identify the shooter. Not once, not twice. 3 times he told investigators he didn't know who did it. The case went cold. Then, Cantu found himself caught up in a barroom shooting with a plainclothes officer. He claimed the officer had threatened him by flashing his gun. Shots were exchanged between Officer Joe de la Luz and Rubin, with Rubin insisting he fired back in self-defense. However, the officer told a different story, saying Rubin shot him without any provocation. Since there was no solid evidence in the officer's shooting case, authorities decided to reopen the charge from the construction site. They interviewed Juan Moreno again, but this time they brought him to the police station. And this time, he finally said the name they wanted to hear, Rubin Cantu. But was it the truth, or just the answer they needed? Cantu was arrested and given the harshest punishment, but he never stopped insisting he was innocent. Even on August 24, 1990, his final day, he held on to that claim. 3 years after the incident, Moreno took back his statement, saying Cantu wasn't the one with Garza that night. Even Garza himself admitted that another childhood friend was with him during the robbery. Moreno said he felt pressured to point the finger at Cantu as the shooter. A lot of people believed Rubin was punished for a crime he never committed. Many believe the police were eager to pin the crime on him simply because he had shot Officer de la Luz. Even District Attorney Sam Millsap, who once strongly supported the ultimate punishment, later admitted he regretted it and doubted that Rubin was the one who actually committed the act. Now, this is Troy Davis, who was convicted and later given capital punishment for the passing of off-duty police officer Mark McPhail in Savannah, Georgia. On a summer night in Savannah, Georgia, a series of events unfolded that would change Troy Davis's life forever. It was August 18, 1989, when 19-year-old Michael Cooper was injured in a sudden incident. Hours later, another tragedy occurred, one that would place Davis at the center of a case filled with unanswered questions. Davis and his friend Daryl Collins had left a pool party that evening, eventually stopping near a Burger King parking lot. There, they saw a man named Sylvester "Red" Coles arguing with a homeless man over a bottle of alcohol. At some point, the homeless man, Larry Young, was struck. But in the confusion, he couldn't tell who had done it. Hearing the disturbance, Officer Mark McPhail, an off-duty police officer working as a security guard, stepped in to help. But before he could react, he was injured twice. He collapsed and never got back up. The investigation moved quickly, and authorities wanted answers. Just hours later, Coles went to the police and accused Troy Davis. With no physical evidence linking Davis to the case, the prosecution relied almost entirely on witness statements. 9 people testified against him, saying they had seen him at the scene. That was enough for a conviction. In 1991, Davis was found guilty and given the harshest sentence possible. For years, Davis insisted he was innocent, and as time passed, more questions about the case emerged. 7 of the 9 key witnesses later changed their statements, saying they had been pressured by police. Some admitted they hadn't actually seen what happened, while others suggested the real culprit was Coles, the same man who had accused Davis. Despite these serious doubts, the courts refused to reconsider the case. As his final day approached, people across the country and around the world spoke out. Protests took place. Petitions gained hundreds of thousands of signatures. Celebrities, politicians, and human rights organizations all urged the courts to look at the evidence again. But nothing changed. On September 21, 2011, Troy Davis took his final breath. In his last words, he addressed Officer McPhail's family, his own loved ones, and those carrying out his sentence, maintaining his innocence until the very end. At 11:08 p.m., he was gone. Later, his case became one of the most talked about legal decisions of the year. On October 31, 1981, 76-year-old Sister Tadia Benz was tragically harmed inside the St. Francis Convent in Amarillo, Texas. When the other nuns discovered her body, they didn't immediately suspect anything unusual. They assumed she had fallen out of bed and passed away, despite the severe injuries she had suffered. It took days before the police were finally able to examine the scene and confirm that something far more disturbing had happened. So, how did a teenage boy become the main suspect in a case with no clear leads? Just days after the incident, a local psychic walked into the police station claiming to have a vision of the person responsible. Without hesitation, they led officers straight to the home of 17-year-old Johnny Garrett, who happened to live right across the street from the convent. From that moment on, he was their prime suspect. Investigators later found fingerprints inside the convent that matched Garrett's, but there was a problem. He admitted to being inside before, and even stealing from the building. But he insisted he had nothing to do with what happened to the nun. Still, police claimed he had confessed, even though Garrett refused to sign the typed confession. Once in prison, a jailhouse informant came forward, conveniently saying that Garrett had admitted to the crime. But was this a real confession, or was someone trying to save themselves at Garrett's expense? Strangely enough, even though there was key DNA evidence that could have definitively linked the suspect to the incident, it was thrown out because the state pathologist claimed no one told him to keep it. There was also evidence that suggested Garrett wasn't responsible. Investigators found several unidentified fingerprints, hairs, a bloody V-neck shirt, athletic socks, shoe prints, and blood on the exit door, none of which belonged to him. Another boy even backed up Garrett's story, saying they had broken into the convent 2 days before the tragic incident to steal something, which explained the fingerprints. But despite all of this, a jury still convicted Johnny Garrett and sentenced him to capital punishment. Police also linked what happened to Sister Tadia Benz to another tragic case that took place months earlier: the tragic passing of 77-year-old Narnie Bryson. Despite this, Garrett's lawyers never attempted to use that case to raise doubts about his guilt or help prove his innocence. Johnny faced the ultimate penalty on February 11, 1992. In his final moments, he expressed gratitude to his family and had some strong words for those responsible, telling them exactly how he felt. Some say he also left behind a longer letter, cursing everyone who played a role in convicting him. In 2004, DNA evidence connected a man named Leoncio Perez Rueda to the tragic case of Narnie Bryson. Rueda later confessed to taking out a nun's life as well. He was a Hispanic immigrant whose appearance matched the descriptions given by witnesses from the night of the crime. Rueda claimed that his friend, Fernando Flores, pressured him to physically harm the woman. Interestingly, at first, all eyes were on Flores as a potential suspect in what happened to Sister Benz. But instead of digging deeper, the police shifted their focus to Johnny Garrett. And why? because a psychic pointed the finger at him. No solid evidence, no logical connection, just a claim from someone claiming to see beyond the physical world. Meet Lena Baker, a woman who was born into struggle on June 8, 1900, in Cuthbert, Georgia. Growing up in a sharecropping family, she spent her childhood working in the fields, knowing nothing but hardship. As she got older, she became a mother of 3 and worked as a maid to provide for her children. But no matter how hard she tried, life kept backing her into impossible situations. Then came the moment that changed everything. A single decision, one she may have seen as her only way out, led to consequences no one could have imagined. Was she truly guilty, or was she a victim of a system that never gave her a chance? Stay tuned. In 1944, she began working for Ernest Knight, a white gristmill owner who had suffered a broken leg. Knight, significantly older than Lena, soon controlled her and kept her against her will in harsh conditions. The townspeople and Knight's own son disapproved of their association, leading to threats against Lena. Despite these warnings, Knight continued his behavior. One fateful evening, an argument erupted between Lena and Knight. In a desperate attempt to defend herself, Lena shot Knight during a struggle. She immediately reported the incident, asserting that she had acted in self-defense. Lena was taken into custody and faced serious charges. Her trial, held on August 14, 1944, was swift and unjust. Presided over by Judge William Two-Gun Worrell, known for keeping pistols visible on his bench, the proceedings lasted just 1 day. An all-white, all-male jury convicted Lena, disregarding her testimony about the abuse she endured and her plea of self-defense. At that time, systemic racial discrimination prevented African Americans from serving on juries, further stacking the odds against her. Despite a 60-day reprieve granted by Governor Ellis Arnold to allow for review of the case, the Board of Pardons and Parole denied clemency. On March 5, 1945, Lena Baker faced the electric chair in Georgia, making her the only woman in the state's history to receive this punishment. Her final words were a poignant declaration of her innocence. "What I did in self-defense. I have nothing against anyone. I am ready to meet my God." For decades, Lena's resting place had no marker. In 1998, members of her community raised funds to provide a modest headstone. The movement to clear her name gained momentum, and in 2005, the Georgia Board of Pardons and Parole granted Lena Baker a full and unconditional pardon. The board acknowledged that denying her clemency in 1945 was a grievous error, and recognized that under different circumstances, she could have been charged with a lesser offense, sparing her life. What if your entire life depended on the words of one person? No evidence, no hard proof, just a single testimony. That's exactly what happened to Richard Glossop. On January 7, 1997, Barry Van Treese, the owner of the Best Budget Inn in Oklahoma City, was found after an attack. Soon after, police arrested Richard Glossop, the motel's manager, and accused him of orchestrating the tragic incident. But there was no physical evidence against him. The entire case relied on the words of Justin Sneed, a maintenance worker at the motel. Sneed admitted to committing the crime but claimed Glossop had pressured him into it and even offered money. Was he telling the truth, or was he trying to save himself? The jury took his word for it, and in 1998, Glossop was sentenced to the ultimate punishment. But was justice actually served? His first conviction was overturned in 2001 after the court ruled that his defense had been inadequate. But when he was retried in 2004, the jury reached the same verdict and handed him the same sentence. Over the years, his legal team and advocacy groups have questioned Sneed's testimony, arguing that he was pressured and that his statements have been inconsistent. They've also pointed out the lack of physical evidence and accused prosecutors of hiding key information that could have helped Glossip. Then, in February 2025, everything changed. The U.S. Supreme Court overturned Glossip's conviction, citing major flaws in the prosecution's case. The justices revealed that not only had prosecutors failed to correct false testimony, but they had also withheld crucial details, including information about Snead's psychiatric history. Writing for the majority, Justice Sonia Sotomayor stressed the importance of a fair trial and called out the prosecution for failing to disclose critical evidence. Glossip's case has drawn intense political attention, especially in Oklahoma. Republican State Representative Kevin McDougal has been one of his most vocal supporters, warning that the state may have come dangerously close to giving the worst possible sentence to an innocent man. Alongside other lawmakers and advocacy groups, McDougal has helped bring national focus to the case, raising serious questions about how the justice system handles cases like this. Now, with the Supreme Court's ruling, Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond faces a crucial decision. Should Glossip be retried? With an old case, a shaky witness, and a history of mishandled evidence, moving forward won't be easy. The outcome could not only decide Glossip's fate, but could also have a lasting impact on the way justice is carried out in Oklahoma and beyond.